Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast. Before we get started with the episode, I wanted to let you know about a new free ebook available on our website. This ebook goes over the top reasons most financial plans fail and covers what a quality financial plan should consist of. The link to download Top Reasons Most Financial Plans Fail is listed in the episode notes. Now on to today's episode.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast, where we believe the best financial advice should always be conflict-free. I'm your host, Casey Smith, guiding you to financial freedom. Today is my co-host, Missie Beach. Hey, Missy.
Hey, Casey. How you doing today?
Doing good. Today, we're going to talk about planting financial seeds for the next generation. And, you know, I think that a lot of us, maybe people even listening to this podcast, we kind of live in a bubble at times. And we don't realize what's really happening in the rest of the world.
You're absolutely right. We take a lot of things for granted, and life just happens way too easily.
Right.
Even though, you know, we think it's really rough at times. It's not.
So I saw a stat recently, 63% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, including nearly half of the six-figure earners.
Well, I can believe that.
Yep.
I can see that out there.
And so, you know, we think about, our theme this quarter is financial success is intentional. And what that means is that you don't just wake up one day wealthy. I mean, you can inherit money, but you can also easily squander it very quickly. You can have a great paying job, and maybe you're considered rich. I hate that word, by the way.
Kids love that word.
I know, dude, don't they?
Yes.
I think it's a YouTube. Somebody on YouTube's doing that. Use the word rich. My youngest son seems to be using the word rich. And I just cringe. But you can be rich or you can be wealthy. Those are two separate things. We talked about in prior podcasts. But ultimately, if you want to set out and make a difference in yourself, but let's say you're doing well, you've saved well, you've got a nice retirement going. How do you make sure that this continues generation to generation? And I think that's what I want to talk about, planting seeds. How do we plant seeds with our kids now so that in the future, that next generation is likely to understand investing, understand money. Let's just say that. Understand money.
And, you know, I feel like that's gotten harder and harder as we move away from a cash society, because kids just see us whip out the old credit card wherever we are, and it's like magic, You know? There's really no exchange of anything except this little plastic thing, and voila, you just walk out of a restaurant, of a store. Things magically show up on your doorstep these days. And
true. Amazon.
There's really no effort to acquire goods and services. So you're right. How do we explain to the future generation the value of money and what it takes to acquire money and acquire goods and services?
You know, it's, when our kids were real little, we were more focused on behavior than you are anything else, right? And I remember every time we would go eat dinner out, usually we were never members of a golf club until our middle two or our oldest was probably 9 or 10, which is when he really started taking up the game. But we would go to dinner and we'd look at all of them and say, okay, remember country club behavior. And it became like a thing in our house of having country club behavior. And my daughter, she's down in Ocala this week for some training. And I was down there with her the first 3 nights, and we went out for a nice dinner, and it was like this Grand Prix, which is these horses jump these huge poles, and it's the professionals, like a professional circuit. So we went, and they have a dining experience, and it's a nice dining experience. And she looked at me as we were walking in. She goes, "I know, Dad, country club behavior." And she's 15 years old, right? So I was like, "Oh my gosh, we haven't said that since she was like 4 or 5 years old." But but yeah, that's what you trying to train them. So when they leave, and for my oldest, I would always tell them, it's like, look, you represent God, you represent your family, and you represent wiser wealth management. Because I was like, I'm a business owner. I'm a small business owner, which means one little mistake, right?
It comes back.
It comes back at me. So we need to make sure that we're always on our best behavior. And so I feel like the same thing can be done with money. And I'll admit, you think that from my standpoint, it would be like, okay, this is investing. This is, hey, man, I probably am behind the ball on that a little bit, because I haven't, we had allowances, and oh my gosh, it's such a pain to keep up with. Did you do it? Did you not do it? Did you, and sometimes they get too much stuff, and we're like, look, we're not buying anything until it's a birthday or a Christmas. Other than that, forget it.
Yeah, you don't need it.
You don't need it. But it's Dave Ramsey has this whole thing for little kids, these little charts, like they're like almost like the little mini whiteboards, and you can check off the chores, and you get your money, and you have your saving jar, your giving jar, and then you have your spending jar.
Yes.
And we tried that for a season, and it sort of worked, but then it's always a pain because I don't carry cash.
No.
So now we find ourselves driving to the bank to go and get cash. To then give to them, then you have to make change to split it up in the 10% jar and the 15% jar and then the spending jar. I don't know. Did you do anything with your boys when they were real little with money?
Well, this is kind of a funny story because this is my professional life. I always talk about it way more than my boys ever want to hear. At the dinner table, whenever, and they just their eyes glaze over and roll back into their heads, and they're like, "Oh, Mom." But when my oldest was a toddler, some of his first words were compound interest. And I would say, Hatcher, now why do we save money? And he would say, compound interest. And at first it was just, parroting, the words, and he didn't understand what it was. And then eventually it grew into a lesson like, well, okay, here you're getting these birthday checks or Halloween, $10 in your card. And
right.
Well, we're going to put it in the bank. And it grew into, compound interest, what does that mean? Well, the bank is going to give you more money. If you give them your $25, years from now, they're going to give you more dollars back because you gave them the use of your money. And he was like, oh, all right, well, that's pretty cool. I don't need any more, baseballs or cars or whatever right now. So I'm cool to, give it to the bank for some years until I'm older and there's, a video game or something that I want to buy. So we kind of translated it into purchasing power down the road, and I could get something better and greater than something I don't really need right now.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of that simple phrase of compound interest that started at an early age. But yeah, we never really got into the allowance thing either. We tried it, and it's just more work than it's worth. For us, it was
at least the cash-based allowance system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're part of the family. You're going to do your chores. Right. So it was more about figuring out how to explain to our children that, Mom and Dad work, and these sports lessons, your golf clubs, your $300 baseball bats.
Right.
They cost a lot, and it's not just something that comes easily. So, that there's a value of everything. And if you want that, you need to show that you're going to work hard at this thing, and it's something that you are really invested in. And, if we're not going to just go by the $50 bat, you need to show commitment.
Right.
And so I think for my kids, it was hard at first to show them that it's not just something that, we do it because everybody else does it.
Yeah.
That's a big thing with kids. They're like, well, so-and-so just got this bat or so-and-so got it. And I'm like, okay, well, but your old bat is fine for now.
Right.
You know, it's not worn
Right.
out, you know, you just got it 5 months ago. Yeah, there's a new model, but you don't need that yet.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just
I,
hard.
if you talk to some of the kids that are some more wealthy clients or the wealthiest clients, and you talk to them for a little while, you get them talking about when they were little, they thought they were dirt poor.
Oh, yeah. It's great.
It's like a recurring theme,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and what's interesting, you know, my son had a comment recently about one of his friends who has everything. Like they have a farm, 2,000 acres or something, somewhere up north for hunting. They have a plane to get there. They live in the country club neighborhood. You know, we're 15 minutes away. Right. And he's like, well, they might be moving. And I said, oh, why? Where do you go from there?
Yeah.
And he said, oh, well, I guess they're not good savers because they may have to sell the house to get the money for the kids to go to college.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, wow. I mean, you think about all the things that they have, but that just tells you that they have no money in the bank. They're rich.
Nah, yeah,
they're not wealthy.
Rich.
They're rich.
Exactly. They've got the private plane and the farm and
Right.
doing all these great
Small
vacations.
private plane, not a jet, but yes,
Right, okay.
but still, operating costs is still a thing, right? So yeah, it's helping kids see that wealth is hidden, right? I mean, some we've had clients come in overalls with snuff in their mouth, driving a beat up Hyundai who deposit $3 million into your brokerage account.
That's
you know, it
the
just
best.
yeah. The millionaire next door, I guess, is what we're looking for. But I think honestly with planting seeds, I think it's parents seeing you and living by your example. So if you have lots of credit card debt and you're living a life this way, and you're not saving, and they have no idea what's happening, then they're just going to mimic that eventually. Especially for more wealthy families, because you have a certain lifestyle and they graduate thinking they need that minimum lifestyle. They don't understand about starting over. Right?
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. And think about it. Another area where our clients really excel is cars, because how often do you meet with a client and they're like, oh, yeah, I guess it really is time to get a new car. My car's, 15 years old. It's got 180,000 miles on it.
Absolutely.
And then I think about my kids and they're like, oh, Mom, your car's 20 years old. Why do you drive this? It's so embarrassing. And I'm like, because it drives. It still looks good. It's sound mechanically. So why would I get rid of a paid for car, boys?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, all right. And I'm like, see, this is how you make sound financial decisions.
Yep.
You don't get rid of an asset that works to buy an asset that depreciates. And they're like, okay.
But yet that's the American way. That's why 63% people are living paycheck to paycheck, because they're trying to chase what they see other people doing. I will say in the metro Atlanta area, you drive down the street, for the most part, there's some really nice cars. Everyone seems to have new cars. Now there's a few areas of town where that changes pretty dramatically. But I was in Memphis over the summer with my son for a golf tournament, and it was in a very challenged part of town. We'll just say that. We drove my car there. And while he was playing a practice round, I ran over to the local grocery store to get Gatorades and all the things he would need for the week. And my car in the parking lot was the only one that was completely intact.
Oh, jeez.
Every car in that Memphis parking lot was missing bumpers or door handles or something. And you don't have to drive a car like that. No.
Well, did your son notice that?
Well, he didn't go.
Oh,
he
okay.
Didn't go. Yeah, I was a little nervous. I didn't really know where I was, and I would not go back there. But the point in all this is there are people who are hurting, who need probably some change or counseling in their life, not because of their bad car, but because they're just making bad life decisions or they're living from dollar to dollar.
Yes.
But that's not the majority of Americans. Majority of Americans have the ability to make changes. They just have to make hard decisions.
Exactly.
And you can't be worried about what other people are doing. You worry about what your situation is and what's best for you. Dave Ramsey has that great saying, act like no one today so you can live like no one else tomorrow in the future.
Oh,
right?
I love that. Yeah. And I think it's really good as parents to let our kids know, like, why we make that decision. Like, hey,
Sure.
well, we don't need a new car because our 10-year-old car still runs.
Yep.
It's fine. It gets us from A to B. So, hey, we don't need the new Range Rover. We don't need the new Maserati, like, your friends. We're great.
You're more than likely. Now, there are people, especially, I guess, in the higher tax areas, Fulton County, that area, that have the ability to have tremendous amount of savings and have all those things. And that's great and good for them. They're living the American dream. They've created businesses and grew those businesses, liquidated those businesses, whatever. But again, it's teaching children about, these are your resources. This is how much you need to put away. You have to live below that. You can't live on 100% of your income. You have to live below that. And then there's we talked about this in our legacy planning series, but there's a whole nother element to that too, is especially for kids who would be having trust funds, or you're going to be providing an income for them because you can, because you're trying to reduce your wealth. For those people, it's also being good stewards of that resource.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think that those are great ways to plant seeds with your children, is starting little. Now, mine are no longer little. They're 2 teenagers and one that's screaming, screaming that way. But for them, I've never done an allowance. I've been like, go get a job or go do whatever. And I'm actually starting to second guess that right now, because what I see with my oldest is he's out with his friends after practice. He's getting a burger, or he's getting this or that, and buying gas for the car, right? And so for me, I had a job, but for him, his job was a sport.
Yes,
because his sport is paying for his college. In order to keep that going, he's got to continue to be really good at his sport. So for him, I'm thinking that probably the best thing to do is give him an allowance and say, okay, this is your X dollars per month. But once you take the girlfriend out to dinner, and once you do all these other things and pay for your gas, you're out.
Yes.
So you're teaching them to live on a budget, simulating what their income would be once they're employees, right? And he can supplement that. He can do side jobs, like if he caddies, he gets $100 or something like that.
That's a great idea. And I know a lot of families that do it that way. They'll give X amount to the teenage kid. And especially once they're in college, they'll do this. And the child will have to buy their clothes, their books, their, dining out, their social, expenses, all from that one lump sum.
Yep.
And it does train the child to
I forgot about clothes.
budget. Yeah, clothes.
That's a really good idea.
Well, and that works better for girls than boys. Like, gosh, my teenage boys have no concept of what clothes cost or how to even acquire clothes, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's true. My oldest, he's a golfer, so all his clothes come from the pro shop.
Yeah.
And he's like super skinny, so they very rarely, he'll call me occasionally. He's like, Dad, they have extra smalls. It's like, get them all.
Get them all, stock up. But yeah, I agree with the budgeting once they're teenagers, trying to do it that way. If they're not going to work because they've got some other focus as, their way through life. And
yeah, other than just handing over Dad's piece of plastic, I'm paying the bill, and they have no idea how that gets paid or what happens with
exactly.
that.
Even if you give them a set amount on the credit card, that's still not doing it.
A limit, yeah. Another thing is there is a service called Greenlight, and we've done a couple of reviews on this. I probably should update the review. They've added so many things to the program, but for a few dollars a month, you can issue Greenlight cards to all your kids. And if you can do an allowance system, if they do an allowance, they can check it off, and then you can approve a transfer from your account to their card. Basically, it operates like a big debit card. And so you can, you have a savings account, which I think pays like 3% interest now.
Wow.
You have a spending account. If you use their debit card, you get like cash back, just like a real credit card would do that. And then they have an investment account. So you can pretty much buy anything inside the brokerage window. So our kids do have that system. They just don't have money regularly going in there.
Okay.
And it's not like a bank where you can log in, take a picture of the check. So we still have to have bank accounts for them at our bank. I have to take a picture of that, the grandparents' check, and then deposit it into my account, then transfer it over to their Greenlight card.
Oh, okay.
And the Greenlight card is not always accepted because my daughter ran into this in Hilton Head, and she was trying to pay with her Greenlight card when she was like 11, and the lady asked her for her ID.
Oh, jeez.
Well, I have to have ID. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
An 11-year-old?
Like, I'm literally standing there with her and ended up having to use my own card. But now Greenlight you can get a custom Greenlight card for like $10, and you can put a picture of yourself on it, meaning not like a driver's license picture, but there's like a picture of her and her horse or something like that. Just to have a cool art on the front. So I noticed that some parents are just getting a picture of their kid on their front. So, well, this is me literally right here on the card.
Yeah.
That's my ID. So, but that's a great system because you can send an allowance to it, and then you can, they can spend it as they wish until they're down to zero. And then it works off your phone. So most kids have phones. So they're looking at their iPhone to see the balances and all that.
Oh,
so
that's neat.
So it's a great service. My oldest is probably, and they have it for seniors too. They have a senior version for like mom and dad.
So you can keep tabs on mom and dad.
Exactly.
Money. I like that.
Yeah. Especially if they're like in a nursing home, but they can spend things. You can put money on the card, and then you can see the transactions, because that's where a lot of fraud happens in that environment. But going back to the kids, Ethan, I think my oldest is a little embarrassed to pull out his Greenlight card at times. I think his buddies make fun of him. He's a very strong personality, so I don't know that it really affects him that much. And if it's money, right?
It works.
But he has it on there. In fact, he's actually a pretty good saver. He always makes sure he spends my money first before he spends his own. But loading the card was difficult for him because what we had in his bank, we needed to but you could only do like $500 transactions at a time.
Oh, okay.
So I think it took 4 months.
Okay.
Because it's
build up.
Yeah, because it's like every 3 days, and then I'd forget.
Yeah,
and then
of course.
Then I'd do another one, then I'd forget for another week or two, and so that was kind of a pain. But there are some, but for little kids, I think that's a great start.
That is a great start. Now I use the Capital One platform with my teens because they have a teen checking. And so I can link that and see it on my login, and then I can automate it where I could send them, an allowance every month if I wanted to.
Got it.
And then I can see all of their transactions on their debit cards.
Right.
And transfer money back and forth. And, I can be like, hey, what was that $90 purchase?
Right.
So I question it like Big Brother.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's nice. And they can also do mobile deposits with their birthday checks from relatives and things like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's good. That's taught them that skill. So when, they're adults, that they'll know about mobile deposits and what to do with these. Oh my God, a paper check. What is this thing?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think I've talked about this on the podcast in the past, but Caitlin finally has completed the Dave Ramsey teen course. I made her do that for a saddle that she wanted. And I will say it was very long. It's a whole semester's worth of material. One section had, she said, over 100 5 to 10 minute videos.
Wow.
So, and of course, I asked her if she liked it, and she was like, She's like, no, it's boring. He said the same thing. He says, don't get a car loan and don't get in debt. That's all he said the entire time. And I said, well, Caitlin, you know more than 80% of Americans.
Well, those were great takeaways. Yeah, I mean.
But she's like, just kept repeating it over and over again. But she learned other skills too. And Pony Club, which is, it's kind of like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, but just horse related. And so it's not so much about riding horses. It's just learning and caring for, right? And it was funny at Christmas time that the director was like, okay, we're going to play this game. And then you have to write a check out. So she has these blank checks. Mm-hmm. You have to write a check out for what you pay in board. Because they're trying to teach the kids of like, hey, this is an expensive sport and you should understand what the costs are. Mm-hmm. And Caitlin and one other girl were the only ones that could write out a check.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
Everyone else there, the other maybe 10 or so
had no clue
how to write a check.
I remember I learned that in third grade.
And they're all teenagers.
Math. Yeah. Third grade math is when I learned how to write a check. And I don't think they teach that in school anymore.
No, probably not. Well, in state of Georgia now we have that finance class that will start, I think is it next year, required for all high schools, or so that should be in that class. But yes, you are correct. They took it out for a while, which is kind of silly. But yeah, I think it's just little things like that and just talking about what's happening, talking about how things work. But more importantly, it's setting an example as you're talking about it. Don't say this is what you should do when you're actually doing something polar opposite of that.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Just modeling the good behaviors and not being afraid to talk about money.
Correct.
Not in numbers necessarily, but just the concepts.
How things work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the planting seeds, you want to stop, like if you have people making bad money decisions in your family, you have to stop that generational curse. Mm-hmm. And you can stop with you, and maybe it already has, but it's teaching the next generation. This is how we built it's telling the story. This is how we built our wealth over time. Mm-hmm. This is how it was in the beginning, before you were born or before you remember. Mm-hmm. We were really, penny pinching, and what you see now is different, right?
Oh yeah, when we first got married, remember how it was, it just decisions that we made along the way that got us to where we are today matter. So it just doesn't happen by chance. Just keep reminding kids like that. It's every decision that you make has an impact on your financial future.
I don't know there's much more that I can add. I will say you might want to take a look at episode 128, Transferring Wealth from Generation to Generation. We get into more how to do more bigger dollar transfers. Mm-hmm. Episode 121, Designing Your Portfolio to Leave a Lasting Legacy. Those are all more estate planning. There's a great YouTube video we linked in our show notes to what is legacy planning, why is it important, and then our role as financial advisors in legacy planning. Legacy planning, if I can spit it out. I think the big thing is just helping. Yeah, there's a point at which you can teach them when they're younger, middle school age, and then there's in high school, unfortunately, they're teenagers and they're not listening.
No, they're not.
So I think the other phase of that, and I have not experienced it yet, and I guess you're on the edge of it, but it's going to be in college and as young adults, is being able to, hey, let's go grab some coffee. Let's talk about your financials and what's happening, or hey, you just got your first apartment, you're trying to buy your first house, and let me explain to you the basics of how this needs to work, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But even then, I have dads that say, well, I've been telling them, but they're not listening. But if there's any one takeaway, and you may have something different, but I think it's 10%. If you can teach them to save 10% of what they make for their future selves, they're going to be multimillionaires.
Yeah. Oh,
by default.
Start talking about that now. So that's ingrained and it's automatic. So when they get their first job, they put 10% on that line when they're filling out their 401k. Yes.
Yeah. even if they don't feel like they can afford it, they have to be able to do it,
Mhm.
and then try to live on the balance and staying out of debt.
Absolutely.
But yeah. All right, Missy, thanks for the conversation today.
All right. Thank you, Casey. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening, that way you don't miss any new episodes. We would also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. We would love to hear from you. This episode was produced and edited by Lilton Moore.